Welcome to the Southern Steep. Southern Steep is a public health and social justice podcast that centers the voices of community leaders in the Southern United States. Conversations highlight innovative approaches to unapologetic leadership, meaningful partnerships, and thriving communities. My name's Nicole Elenoff, and I'm joined today by the Isaiah Webster. Hello again.
Hello, Miss Elenoff. How are you?
I'm doing well. You know, we are hosting together again, and I think that we are going to bring a similar Isaiah and Nicole factor to this episode. What do you think?
I'm looking forward to working with you again. I must confess, I'm cold. It is 30 degrees in DC today, and I'm sure folks in the South are like, why is he complaining about the weather? But I actually am cold. It's been very cold lately, so I'm trying to bring some warmth to the conversation.
Well, we love that. And I'm sure a lot of folks, even in the South, are cold because it's 64 degrees in Orlando and I'm cold as well. So yeah, it gets cold here too.
So the last time I was on a pod with you, I discovered that your husband is a lumberjack. I'm just wondering, what will I discover today?
I guess we're going to find out. It's going to be really rich. Really
I'm also
happy
excited, Nicole, because go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was about to say I'm really excited because I think this is the most people we've ever had on a pod. Even when we did the joint episode with Bianca and Tori, and there were only 4 of us, we're breaking the seal on 5 today. So I'm kind of excited to see how this goes over.
Well, you just beat me to the punch because I've been calling this the LACOA party, and you're going to find out in a little moment. So we're going to introduce our guests in a hot second, but quick shout out about NASTAD. The Southern Steep podcast is brought to you by NASTAD, a nonprofit, nonpartisan public health organization in Washington, D.C. You can learn more about NASTAD by visiting www.nastad.org. So I'd now like to introduce the guests of the hour, the LACOA party, and LACOA is the abbreviation for the Latino Commission on AIDS. In response to the critical unmet need for HIV prevention and care for Latinos, a coalition of Latino leaders founded the agency in 1990. The commission realizes its mission by spearheading health advocacy for Latinos, promoting HIV education, developing model prevention programs for high-risk communities, and by building capacity in community organizations. Through its extensive network of partner organizations and community leaders, the Commission works to mobilize an effective community response to meet the health challenges and address the impact of HIV/AIDS, hepatitis, and STIs in communities nationwide. The Latino Commission on AIDS has proudly served the Latinx LGBTQ population and is committed in creating and promoting a safe space. The Commission is the founder of the Hispanic Health Network, dedicated to eradicate health disparities in our communities. Wow. Y'all have done incredible work and have been going strong since 1990. And 3 individuals doing some of this amazing work. So happy to have them join us today on the Southern Steep. Judith Montenegro, the Program Director for Latinos in the South. Hi, Judith.
Hi, everyone.
Gabriela Betancourt, Director of Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning for Hands United CEBA. Hi, Gabriela.
Hello, everyone.
And last but not least, Bolo Nieto, Director of Operations for Hands United CEBA. Hi, Bolo.
Hi, Nicole. Hi, Isaiah. Saludos. Hola.
So, as Isaiah mentioned earlier, this is the first time we've ever had this many folks to a podcast. And we heard earlier that this is y'all's first time podcasting. Not all of you, but, how does it feel to be on your first podcast?
Probably going to go into Spanish. So please let me know when I'm transitioning into that so I can come back to the English part of it.
We love to see it. And any way you want to express yourself is welcome here on this podcast. So I thought we could take a moment and go around and you all can share a little bit more about what you do. We shared your titles, but we'd love to learn more about what the day-to-day is and what y'all do for the Latino Commission on AIDS.
again, we are part of Hands United. That's the name of our capacity building assistance program, providing technical assistance to the southern U.S. Under this, we bring a lot of different, we assist the organizations in the potential issues that may arise when it comes to implementing two particular arms for us, which is HIV testing in non-clinical settings and everything that it's part of that bigger component to ensure the effective implementation, but more so the reach of engaging priority populations in knowing their status in non-clinical settings. And the other arm is prevention. So prevention and all components of preventions, including biomedical, that it's PrEP, and all components. And now what we're seeing, the transitions into, telehealth or teleprep, and how we can, together with organizations or jurisdictions, look at the most effective models to implement this. So that's what Hands United does.
Y'all are doing some incredible work in the South, and we're really happy to be partnering with Hands United SEPA. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about that later on in the episode. Judith, can you tell us a little bit more about Latinos in the South?
Yeah, so we're a regional program. I'm the program director. We work in 9 states across the Southeast. And originally our program started because we saw an increase in Latinx immigrants coming to some of these deep South states. It was a new destination for a lot of immigrants. But we also saw that the HIV infection rates were also increasing at the time, and particularly in communities of color. And so when we started this program, part of the work was to build leadership in the South, particularly with line staff and folks working directly with the Latinx community. And so we do a lot of community mobilization. We provide capacity building assistance. And we also do some community-based participatory research or assessments of what's happening here in the Southeast. So our day-to-day looks very different depending on what day it is, and what's happening regionally. But we also introduced another sort of component, our Encuentro, which is a regional conference that brings together Latinx LGBTQ plus communities and allies to be able to discuss health issues in the South. And it's really tailored to address sort of the needs that are happening and allow for some space so that folks can organize together and be in community and address the needs of different populations that are often overlooked.
I think it's so incredible that there's a specific program dedicated to Latinos in the South, because the experience is so specific, and being able to center that population is so incredible and important. So we know about the incredible work you're doing and the programs you're with, but what brought y'all to public health and HIV work in general?
I can go ahead. So my first steps into public health actually were as a direct service provider. So I was a health educator, a health advocate, a counselor, and I did HIV testing as well. And I mostly worked with teenagers in the foster care system, and also recently arrived to New York City. And I kind of got into it because, having grown up here in New York and experienced my teenage years here, my passion was really to sort of give, especially being a child of immigrants, some of the resources and information that maybe are not as accessible to you as maybe some others. As I got older, I became a little burnt out doing actual direct services. And also I was getting older, so I wasn't necessarily part of that age group anymore that could really connect. But I did feel like I still could contribute. And so I went into sort of the research and evaluation side of things. And over the years, I just became more and more interested in sexual and reproductive health. So that's been the area that I've been working in since 2004.
Thanks, Gabriela. I think that having direct experience really helps when doing a lot of the SIBA work. And that's so great that you can bring all of that to what you do now.
I guess I go next. So, well, now I am in Florida, so I go by a Golden Girls phrase. So picture it, 1994. I was arriving to New York from Ecuador, and I was actually in search of a way to be able to connect with my sexual identity and orientation. It was not open in Ecuador. It was very young. So my sister pointed out a commercial of Latitude Zero, which was an Ecuadorian specific LGBT group in New York City. And I joined, and through them, we started doing a lot of different social events that connect not only your sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, but also the culture of being Ecuadorian living in New York City. Through that, I met the Latino Commission on AIDS, and we started working together in terms of volunteering, like leadership workshops, and there was an opportunity to joined the commission, actually doing a membership program. So I was coming from the advertising field. 9/11 happened. That really was not an option for me. So I transitioned into helping the commission through that. And there was an anti-homophobia program that came up that used social, in that case, just marketing, and events to address homophobia within the Latinx community in New York City. So, and that was my transition into the commission, and then doing the different events, increase my capacity building, and then I transitioned into doing Juntos Construyendo, which was more of a New York statewide SIVA specific to Latinx LGBT communities, and then went into Hands United. So, and here I am.
Bolo, which Golden Girl do you identify with most? Because now I'm curious, you brought it up.
I think I have a little bit of all of them.
That is such a cop-out answer.
I know. Well, you have to look at the percentages. That's the follow-up, What's the percentage of Rose that you have, or what's the percentage of Blanche that you have? But,
Fair enough.
Dorothy. I definitely think Dorothy.
Well, that makes sense because he quoted Sophia, and Dorothy comes from Sophia. Thank you so much, Bolo.
Sure.
Judith, well, I guess one quick thing. I think it's beautiful how you have roots with the Latino that really have been established for a while, and you've grown within the organization, and that's so cool to see.
Yeah, so I guess similarly to Gabriela, I started my public health work as a child of immigrants, making appointments for my parents, translating at medical appointments for myself, reading bills for, neighbors, folks in the community. So, my relationship with health, I think, spans over my entire lifetime, right? But I was working at a law firm where I would manage denied workers' compensation claims. And so folks who had been injured at work and their employers did not want to cover their medical bills, did not want to provide them with any compensation while they were out of work after being injured. And it really took, so I was doing a lot of case management and working with mainly Latinx community members who had suffered like really life-changing injuries, and having to get them medical care at free to low cost, or being like, you know what, we'll pay you once we finish suing this employer, hold on. Having to develop relationships with providers. I was working under, her name is Annabelle Rosa, and she actually did communications at the time with Dennis de Leon, who was the president of the commission before his passing, when she was living in New York. And she knew Mayor Dinkins, and somehow I met folks who started working at the commission, who were working at the commission. I received capacity building from the commission. In college, I participated at NLAD events, so National Latinx AIDS Awareness Day. And all of this to say that sort of my life was so connected to this organization in so many like different ways that when a job opportunity came, I was really hesitant because I thought like, oh my God, do I have to move to New York? I hate cold weather. I don't want to live in the city. I love the South. And fortunately, it was a organizing position. I was already doing organizing work in my spare time. And it was a perfect fit. I met more folks at the commission. And so it just seemed to like lead me there. It wasn't anything where I was looking to work in this field or I knew a lot about HIV advocacy, but I did know about healthcare access and the barriers that exist. I've learned so much in this position. So it was like this moment where like, when the clouds open up and it's like, oh, well, it feels like I need to be here. Yeah.
All that divine intervention, where, it's just the universe is telling you, you gotta do it. I feel like I know you all so much more now. We've had an opportunity to work together. But I appreciate you sharing, what brought you to this work. I've known Judith like through a friend for several years now, and this is really our first time getting to talk about this. So that's awesome. I do have to say one other thing. I feel like we are more united now, which makes me think about Hands United. And I just wanted to ask, how did you all come up with Hands United as a program name?
That's a good question. I think I'm the, how is it called, senior of the staff from us.
You hold the most institutional memory. I was going to say, if there's any one of us that knows how Hands United came to be, it's Bolivar.
And what's that phrase? And yet and still, I don't know how that name came about. I was not necessarily part of the SIVA team, but this is our fourth cycle. So we've been in providing capacity building in its different in the different ways that's been designed, right? From starting as regional, that I remember was not part of it, but it was regional, specific to priority populations. In this case, it's specific to Latinx communities, and we were in the Northeast, so they became national. But when it comes to Hands United, all I can extrapolate is sort of like the collaboration, and it can go to the model that we have, that ours is a grassroots holistic approach that emphasizes networking. So this is about bringing all our knowledge and experience and expertise together towards the mission that we have, which is to end the epidemic, right? And to increase equity and health amongst the population that we're serving. So I think altogether means that, let's unite our hands to do it.
And just to kind of add to that, I do think it also reflects something that's really core to like a guiding principle that we have, which is that we're not necessarily giving like a hand up or like, but that really this is about the community members that we're trying to serve, and that they're really at the center and like leading this, and we're uniting our hands with them, as opposed to this sort of top-down approach.
One of the reasons why Nicole and I wanted to have you all on is because we so appreciate the collaboration that we've built between NASTAD and LACOA, and really my brother's keeper in the South as well. We feel like we learned so much from you and your expertise. Talk a little bit about how you all feel about the collaborations in the South you've been able to do, not just with us, but kind of across the board. I would like to get a sense of how you feel the collaborations kind of reinforce and enhance the work that you all have already done historically and the work that you're doing now, particularly in the Southern United States.
I mean, I can start, and I'll speak specifically from LITS. And it is that in terms of collaboration, we are a minority-led regional program, right? We really rely on partners and collaborators and co-conspirators, right, to help us get into some spaces, to help us hold folks accountable, to push some of the policy recommendations. I think that, different folks throughout the South have heard me ask, is this going to be available in Spanish? And it has become sort of my tagline. And I'm elated when partners take that up and ask it themselves, right? When folks have taken some of the needs that we've shared really to heart and have implemented those and have also taught us so much. I think some of the organizing work can be lonely, in terms of trying to find partnerships that fit, that where shared values exist to make a collective impact. But once we have been able to find some of those partners, the response has really been incredible from a lot of the partners that we've worked with, and a lot of organizations that have opened their doors to us and have allowed us to come in and share what we know with their staff to improve the services that they're providing for Latinx communities. So I'm really grateful to a lot of the collaborators. And of course, there's folks like Allison Rice and Carolyn McAllister who are always, open to all of my policy questions, all my legal questions, like, what is the law? Like, I'm not an attorney, but, what's your take on this? And is this legal? And if I have, questions regarding advocacy, or sometimes some of the partnerships that we build is just to bounce ideas off. I've been the person who interviews staff that it's incoming for several organizations and universities. They've trusted me as part of their hiring process, right? Like being in the room to ask questions that they may not think of, to ensure that they have the best candidates. And ultimately, those partnerships and collaborations help shape, right, the way we see the South and what's happening.
Yeah, I agree about, people keeping us honest and asking us the tough questions. And we definitely get that a lot from community as well. Gabby, this question is for you, and it kind of dovetails off that. And since you're an eval person, so I hope you don't feel like I'm putting you on the spot. But oftentimes community will ask us, how do we know that CEBA is working? How can we evaluate that, if you will? What is your answer when you normally get that question, particularly from community folks?
I love talking eval. So So I think it's first when community members ask about that, like my heart starts to like burst. I'm so happy just being curious about that process and sort of aware that it's an important thing to consider is like the first step. And usually when community members, either when I've been speaking with them about it or providing sort of training or technical assistance around evaluation, sometimes folks may be a little kind of like a deer in the headlights, thinking that it's like evaluation is this sort of like really crazy, sort of scary process. And actually, we all as humans are evaluators, right? We all kind of wake up in the morning and assess what we need to do when we're crossing the street, like we assess when we can cross the street. But then getting back to like the specifics of your question, I think it's always important for community members to define, well, what is it exactly that you are trying to do? Because that's always going to be your starting point in order to evaluate if what you did was effective. And breaking it down into little steps so that you're able to see if something turns out to be different than what you expected, that you can kind of work your way back and kind of see where is it exactly that maybe there was an opportunity to course correct or to really give yourself accolades and say like, wow, this was done really well. And I can sort of track how we got to this successful outcome. With community members and specifically smaller community-based organizations, and this is kind of like how I went from direct services to the evaluation side of things. And this also goes back to our us three as partners in the South, My Brother's Keeper, NASTAD, and the Commission, is that we've often seen that especially smaller community-based organizations, they're very able and have the capacity to collect their data. Obviously, they're producing the reports that funders require, but they may not have structures in place so that they can actually be empowered by their data so that they can actually tell their own story and leverage that for further funding and really to get themselves to the other place. What I really appreciate about the three, aside from individuals in each of the organizations, like you and Nicole and Erin, and at My Brother's Keeper, Mada and Laquita and Alicia, I think we're all kind of, we do want to empower the community-based organizations and the health departments that we work with so that they can best leverage the information that they collect and their data in order to do a program evaluation, do outcome evaluation, but ultimately maybe do some impact evaluation and really show how their efforts have contributed to ending the HIV epidemic in the South.
Thanks for sharing, Gabby. Just to update me on my language, I keep saying LACOA, but I've picked up that you all say the Commission. Should I update my my moniker?
The Commission just sounds fancier, and you know.
That is as good a reason as any. The Commission, it is.
I'd like to rename this party the party at the Commission. With the Commission.
I want to focus a little bit on Latinos in the South, and particularly, healthcare access. Talk a little bit about how you all are working to make sure that healthcare access for Latinos is up to date.
So I'll talk that most recently we went programmatically, we went on a language justice journey where we had been framing a lot of the conversations around language access, right? And how folks needed to have access to interpreters, they needed to have access to information in their language, they needed to have, and it wasn't just like the interactions you have one-on-one with providers, but rather overall their healthcare experience should be one where they have access. However, as sort of our work has grown and as we've learned more, one of our team members is a language worker. He does interpretation as well and translations. And he shared this idea around, or this principle around language justice. And it just seemed to fit within the framework of meaningful involvement of people living with HIV. And so we think about the MIPA principle, the Denver principles, the real foundation of the HIV/AIDS movement, and how the MIPA principles talk about language, right? People first language, being affirming, destigmatizing the language that we use. And so for us, we have now taken this very different approach in terms of how we advocate for access to healthcare, to include some of these principles that are so important. So that also includes, people need to have access to a driver's license. Well, the South has policies and laws regarding this, and we monitor these policies. Folks in the South, many folks who are undocumented are not eligible for Medicaid and Medicaid services. However, it impacts when hospitals close. It impacts communities, rural communities, communities where immigrants live and work at poultry plants, right? Where do you go for emergency care, for labor and delivery? And so for us, access is not just folks being able to go to their provider, but rather looking at all of these barriers, whether it's language, transportation, and being able to monitor and advocate for those services. Similarly, we know that a lot of line staff at organizations often don't have the tools, resources, or even how can I say this? Have a more influential voice as to how things are done at their organization in order to best serve communities. And so we want to make sure that access doesn't just mean you have one outreach worker who is bilingual, who's translating for the entire agency, but rather organizations are investing, right, and prioritizing community and making sure that folks who have the experience, the knowledge, are in positions to best serve the diverse communities that exist in the Southeast. So it's a lot of from a small individual level, but much more broadly to more of a socioeconomic and community level approach and how we look at access.
Judith, I really appreciate you talking about language justice, especially as more of a proactive, ongoing commitment and investment and not a reactive one. So I've been living in Central Florida in the Orlando community for a while now. And in 2016, when we had the Pulse tragedy, that tragedy really impacted the Latinx community greatly. Most of the victims were of the Latinx community. And as working on as a secondhand responder and realizing that all of the local LGBTQ organizations here didn't have any type of Spanish, any type of language access for the folks that were Pulse survivors. And it really it was a community-wide reckoning in a way that we are not equipped to provide the support to the communities that have been most impacted by this tragedy. And so I think no community should go through a tragedy to make them have that type of reckoning, but it's really shifted the community to be more accessible linguistically and just have language justice as more of a core part of the community. So I think it's great that y'all are doing this more so that it's not a reaction, but just part of the principles. We've talked a lot about TA. We've talked about a lot of things going on in the South, healthcare challenges. And then we throw, Miss Rona into the mix. We got Miss COVID-19. And as 2021, I've been calling it the panty. So we are in the panty. How has this impacted y'all in your TA delivery and overall with the work and programs that you do?
That's so funny that you say panty because my friend says panini, the panini. But I'm glad you brought that up because actually, and this kind of goes, I mean, it's kind of like a similar, to a certain extent, example of like what you just mentioned with what happened with Pulse, which is, the onset of the pandemic and the organizations that we are offering technical assistance to, but our own organization kind of having to react to that, right? And so programmatically, we really wanted to be mindful and switch it from a reactive sort of stance to a response. And how do you respond to technical assistance needs given this sort of crisis that's going on around? And so we came up with like a framework that we're hoping to officially launch, but it's called Real Equity. And so the response is the R, and the response is being informed by evaluation, action, and learning. And the sort of mindset that we kind of why we came to this is that despite what we're seeing with Corona is that without really having equity be something that is also an outcome that we want, we're going to continue to sort of either exacerbate or just recreate these disparities in health. And so we chose equity to be an acronym for using those indicators of E, our responses, are they evidence-based? And if they're being informed by homegrown interventions, how can we sort of leverage that so that there is an evidence base, especially for communities that have been historically marginalized? Quality assurance and improvement, so the Q. The U is for utilization, so how has our initiatives or our efforts, how are they actually being utilized? And then the I and the T and the Y really get into like sort of epi terms about incidence rates, transmission, and whether there's actually been a change. And so obviously like that is something that can be sort of tracked over time. But we really wanted to sort of be mindful that all the work that we sort of propose to do as technical assistance providers is impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, but it's also impacting even much more heavily our community members in the South and the organizations that we work with.
We have more acronyms into the mix. I think that's so, y'all are responding with a program that's going to be responding to this continued pandemic. And really taking this time, like we've been in this world for a year now, this panty world, and there's been a lot of lessons learned. And I think it's cool that y'all are taking those lessons and applying it to the work you're doing.
I think that's in our approach to providing TA, but also looking inside, right? We are an organization also that it's providing also direct services and all the different services, right? And this is, and I come from the business part in terms of like, this is a threat, and if you continue looking just as a threat, then you're, stressing the organization that can create trauma that then, influences the climate, and trauma can, an organization experiencing trauma can, get integrated into its culture. So it's a perpetuating way of approach. So it seems like looking at these threat and looking at the opportunities that exist from that, and then look at our strengths and how can we achieve those opportunities, then to kind of like change a little bit our frame of work in which we can quickly respond to a particular threat without potentially an interruption of services, but we have the capacity, the skills, the abilities, and the other to respond and be able to innovate, change, adapt, tailor, and in getting in with input from the communities that we serve. So it's sort of like having that lenses of as I call it, a maxi, strengths and opportunities as a strategy. It's a way of maybe also looking at our infrastructure and how to create things that then responds to the needs that are, whether it's about specific to individuals, but we look at organizations and jurisdiction as such as well. So. Mm-hmm.
How have you all been prioritizing your self-care?
That's a good question, because we have, I don't know. I mean, we discuss at least Gabriela and Judith and I, and we have discussions about what self-care means, and it can be very parting from an organization and establish protocols and what it means, but it's the individual part in terms of how you do self-care, right, and prevent burnout. But again, it goes back to those mechanisms of understanding what produces that. And if an organization is in stress, then that's going to be communicated to staff. Personally, I just moved to Florida. So I'm like, it's been a year and a half. I continue to say I just moved down here. And when they ask about how long ago, I say a year and a half. I was like, no. You're a Floridian? I'm like, not quite there yet. I'm still a New Yorker, and I miss the cold. So the cold weather is fine for me. But I just go out, listen in the car and explore. I just recently also, move. So there's a lot of different things to do in the house and distract. And I also adopted 2 dogs. So there's a lot of distraction here. So that's my self-care, and movies, and binge watching series, and talking to my team members about different things beyond work.
I'm curious about Judith and Gabby's self-care, but before we move to that, Bolo, what city are you in? Because Nicole's in Orlando.
I'm in Fort Lauderdale.
Fort Lauderdale. Now that's my getaway. I was actually just there a couple weeks ago. So that's a good choice, Bolo.
I have questions about the dogs.
Oh my goodness, here we go.
What kind of dogs?
They are so cute, by the way, if you catch them on camera.
Sure. One, they're both adopted. One's for shelter. One is, I thought it was mixed, but it's a Catahoula. And he is gonna be 10 months old. I cannot pick him up. He's like 60 pounds now. And
a big boy.
And the other one is a Staffordshire Lab mix. And I thought she was going to be the biggest one, but no, she's now I call her little, because in comparison to the other one is, yeah.
So cute. How has everyone else's self-care been going?
So, one self-care thing that I really have been trying my best to do is like around 10 p.m., 10:30, and not always possible to really turn off devices and kind of start to unwind. But something that I heard this morning on the radio, it was about, it was on, I think it was like NPR, or, when they do the sort of, they do these recordings and then like they have it like in the Library of Congress. So it was 2 sisters talking about their experience actually growing up as children of immigrants. And they, even as little girls, they had to sort of do all this translation, as Judy was explaining, like for their parents and stuff. And anyway, long story short, they were sharing now as adults how they've been handling dealing with everything with the coronavirus, and like they have kids and all this stuff. And they said, make your life a sitcom, not a telenovela. And I think like that's how I sort of see it. It's like, thank the Lord for my sense of humor, because I really do. I just kind of see things as like a sitcom because as I've gotten older, especially, like my tolerance for drama has gone into like negative. So that's been helpful for my overall self-care and hopefully for my care of my team members and friends and family too.
I think for me, I'm just like, self-care, what's that? Right? Like, what is that? But I think the most important thing, like I believe in community care, right? And I find a lot of comfort in community care and being able to respond and work in community, because I think that's where a lot of healing happens. But I will say that the pandemic, the panny, has renewed some of my relationships. Like I had cousins I had not talked to in a long time. And for some reason, I guess because we were all bored, like we were like, oh, let's start a group chat. It was family that I hadn't talked to in a very long time, at least, not virtual. Like we had never made time to talk virtually. If we didn't see each other, we didn't. And it was folks from all across the country. So that's been, renewing some of the relationships, spending so much time in my pod. My pod is my sister and her family. And I have a niece. So it is a lot of family fun activities, eating at 5 p.m. because that's what time they eat. And I typically eat at like 8, 9. So it's developing different habits and sort of planning for that. And really having to make some choices as to how I spend my time now that I'm not, out. I decided this year I wanted to learn how to do double Dutch, like jump rope double Dutch. My pod is not on board yet, to like hold the ropes and like learn with me, because you can't learn to double Dutch by yourself. But at the beginning, I think like most people, I took up like a lot of different hobbies. I learned to embroider, to watercolor paint, I started going thrift store shopping, finding vintage finds. So I've tried to find ways to entertain myself and keep myself out of too much trouble. And also, like Abby said, I think it can be so easy. I've been working from home for 7, almost 8 years. So working from home wasn't new. But what was new is everything that was happened combined with like a Trump administration, and being constantly, and this election season was the longest ever. So I think this new year started with some relief and some more of this flexibility to relax, and not always be, doom scrolling on Twitter. I also love to read Reddit. So I'm an Aquarius, and I think it's part of like our nature to be really weird and be interested in different realities. So, but my favorite sort of subreddit thing is, am I the asshole? Like there's just a bunch of people who are terrible to each other. And I'm like, oh dear.
They're bad.
Yeah. But I like love reading it. It's like a guilty pleasure.
Yeah, I haven't gotten into the Reddit, but I'll look that up. Our last question is a question we ask all of our guests. And I'm going, wait, did I say something bad, Judith? I can see.
If you haven't gotten into it, maybe don't.
Oh, okay.
Because it's not great.
There's a lot of assholes out there.
Good to know. Well, then it's something I can avoid. This last question we ask all the guests to come on the pod. And so each of you would like to know, what do you love about the South? And what do you want to see for the South? So all three of you, whoever wants to share first.
I can go. So I'm not in the South, and I am always like pushing my team members to like consider me an honorary Southern member, because I grew up in the South Bronx, and in a lot of ways, there's a lot of similarities. So anyway, what I love actually has been learning new things, but also like just the people that I've met, and I have to say I love every meal that I've had in all of the Southern states that I've been in thus far. What I'd like to see for the South. Obviously, I really want to name like the work that we do. So I'd really like it that there are more equitable resources allocated to the South, and specifically speaking of HIV, to really see an end to the epidemic. But along with that, sort of sexual and reproductive health and justice in general. But I also want to see the South. So I really want to like be able to start going and actually traveling again.
So I guess I go next as a now new resident in the South Florida. What I love about it and the South in general is, and I echo that, is like I used to always, and this was at the beginning of my traveling for work, kind of like the comparison with like New York City, and how, you go to a different location and, instead of like looking at the place with new eyes and exploring it and absorbing its from the food, it's culture, because it's like mini cultures, right? The different uniqueness that every location has, and learn not only from a mapping that I will do, but also in talking to the different organizations and individuals in general. Definitely looking at the different bars, if there's anyone, and looking at what's the space and the interaction. What I'd like to see, it's similar to what Gabriela, I joined, equitable resources. I really want to see a decreasing numbers that we're seeing when it comes to, HIV incidents. I do want to see, a change in what was explored in terms of, access to care. And how we move towards a different environment by addressing so many different inequalities and things that exist right now. So,
well, when did you move to Florida?
Recent. That was so recent, a year and a half ago.
So you really only had maybe like 4 or 5 months before COVID. So are you like, I feel like you are a new Southerner because you haven't been able to go anywhere, right?
I agree.
Able to hang out in Florida and really enjoy it.
I agree.
Yeah. So I think for me, what I love about the South is definitely the resiliency of the folks who live here, the organizing power that sort of continues to teach other parts of the country how to get it done. And I think one thing that, I'll say, I have like a wish list, but so I think Medicaid expansion definitely for our Southern states is crucial and essential, and I want that. But I think overall, I want more money. I want folks in the South to have everything that they need, to have the resources, housing, I just want, historically, the South has guided this country in so many ways, and has taught us so much about Reconstruction, and the civil rights movement is born in the South. Like, how can you not honor that with taking care of the folks who have been doing this work for so long? So for me, it's like give all the money, all the resources, all the flowers to the South.
We agree 1000%. How can our listeners get in touch with you about your programs?
I mean, they can slide into our DMs on Twitter. We have a Facebook page on LITS. You can email us. Our website is latinodeepsouth.org. Our contact information is there. We have our Facebook page. We're always posting job announcements from different organizations. So give us a like if not only for that, right? For some of that. We also, a personal mission of mine is to get everyone hired, get everyone paid. So yeah.
Yeah, when we do our description for this episode, we will link to anything you want us to link to. If there's a place we should be directing people, just let us know and we will be sure to make sure that they can get in touch with you. So I want to thank you all for joining us. You know, NASAD has a lot of partners, but LACOA is the first partner to be in this podcast. And yes, you should take that to mean that we have a lot of affinity for you and your work. So thank you so much for being here. We appreciate all of you, Judith, Gabriela, and Bolo. So thanks a lot.
Oh, thank you so much. It was really a pleasure.
And I hope we didn't scare you too much. I thought you all were great, considering that this was your first podcast for some of you.
Thank y'all so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. This was excellent. Take care, everyone. Stay warm, no matter where you are. Just stay warm. Bye.
Bye.
For this episode's edition of The Southern Charm, we are highlighting Q-Latinx, a grassroots racial, social, and gender justice organization dedicated to the advancement and empowerment of Central Florida's LGBTQ+ Latinx community. Their mission seeks to center and empower the most marginalized members of our community, establishing affirming and supportive healing spaces, build a strong and united community, and work towards a society free of fear, violence, and hate. Earlier in our conversation with the commission, we were talking about language justice, and I just find, the Southern Charm really just kind of meshes well with our conversation earlier. Q-Latinx was actually founded in response to the Pulse tragedy. As I mentioned earlier, there wasn't many spaces working among the intersection of the Latinx and LGBTQ+ communities. And this organization formed to really respond and address that pivotal gap.
Has it been 5 years, almost 5 years since the tragedy?
Yeah, it'll be 5 years this June.
Time really does fly. It's hard to believe that it's been that long, because to me, Nicole, it feels like it was almost yesterday or last week.
Yeah, it's definitely been a wild several years. And as someone who's been in the community throughout this time, I've been able to see a huge difference between pre-Pulse times and then post-Pulse times. And Q-Latinx has really helped make it to these post-Pulse times. There's been so much more attention and intentionality around language justice that Judith talked so much about earlier. And Q-Latinx has really helped lead some of that work. I wanted to highlight a specific program, though, that Q-Latinx has been doing, and that's the Hablando Alto program. As our friends mentioned earlier, there's been a huge increase of HIV among the Latinx community, specifically around Latinx gay and bisexual men. And the Hablando Alto program is a capacity building and skill development program for LGBTQ+ Latinx people living with HIV and allies, seeking to make change in the local community, so in Central Florida, around HIV and addressing the HIV epidemic. And funny enough, that initiative was funded by one of our previous Southern Charms, by SAC with their Gilead Compass Spark initiative.
Everything comes full circle on this podcast eventually.
So Isaiah, we've had a lot of fun today.
Absolutely. I thought that this was a great episode and very informative. I hope our viewers really enjoyed learning about the commission. And of course, check out the description below for all of the great links to their wonderful programs. And of course, we will link to the information about Q Latinx as well.
Absolutely. Well, I'm Nicole Elenoff.
I'm Isaiah Webster.
Thank you for listening.